Do you feel that Vladimir Putin has no choice but to try to go out, try to find this way out of the war against Ukraine by agreeing with Trump's proposal on Ukraine? Do you feel that if Vladimir Putin declines Trump's proposal on Ukraine, then he can lose his grip on power?
I think things are moving in that direction, certainly. It is very clear that Putin now realizes he's in a predicament. He's in a difficult position. And he seems to be now looking more at his own personal survival than perhaps, what is happening in Ukraine to his army. And he knows that, if he is defeated in Ukraine, then that's the end of him. We know what happens in Russia with failed dictators. They very quickly get taken out and removed. And I think Putin is now really looking to see how he can survive himself. And, one is getting the feeling that he realizes that, the cards are all in President Trump's hands. President Trump could lead to the complete demise of Putin or could give him a way out. But Putin knows that his only way out is some sort of orderly withdrawal from Ukraine, rather than complete defeat. If the Russian army is completely defeated in Ukraine, Putin is finished. And that is in the gift of President Trump, I expect. So, I think Trump does hold the key here. And, for President Trump, not that I know him personally, I only sort of read about him and listen to him. He seems to be the sort of person who revels on success and tries to avoid failure as at all possible. If he can create a ceasefire in Ukraine early this year, at the very beginning of his premiership, I'm sure we'll hear him shouting about it all around the world. For him, that will be his greatest success. So, at the moment, the tide, everything is moving in Ukraine's direction, I think, and against Russia. And let's hope that Trump is as good as his word when he becomes president at the end of this month.
It seems also that Vladimir Putin has faced numerous setbacks during the latest months. High casualties rate in Ukraine, as a failure to achieve strategic objectives in the war against Ukraine, the withdrawal from Syria, and also they even have managed to shoot down Azerbaijani Airlines, a civilian plane. Moreover, Russian General Kirillov has been eliminated. What is your assessment of the every setback Russia has faced during the year of 2024?
Well, I think you've captured it very well there, what has happened in the last few months. Setback after setback, and failure becomes a habit. And Putin seems to be failing, virtually everywhere we turn. As you say, even last week, the Russians seem to have shot down a civilian airliner, killing, a lot of people. That in itself would be horrific, and would certainly in the Western world would cause the president or prime minister of that country to have to resign. But when you put it on the back of everything else that's going on, the huge casualty rate, the fact that Russia can only fill up its army these days with North Korean mercenaries, that no doubt is costing Putin an awful lot. So it's an expression that we use, death by 1,000 cuts. And Putin might not have 1,000 cuts, but he's got several hundred. And these are really hurting him and really hurting Russia. And the momentum is so important in warfare and in these sort of geostrategic politics. The momentum is really turning against him, which is why I think we're hearing his conciliatory tones, suggesting that there is a way out rather than just continue to fight. But he also realizes that way out is to allow his own survival is going to be the Russian army out of Ukraine. I can't see, anything less than that. So, things are going badly for Russia. Once things start going badly, it's very difficult to turn them around. And at the moment, one can't see a prospect of that. And maybe Putin is wishing for President Trump to come into power as quickly as possible so that he can stop the war and potentially save his own skin.
Also, let's cover another Russia's setback, the Kursk Oblast, the Kursk region. Russia and Ukraine has successfully destroyed Russia's 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, according to Forbes. Moreover, today, Ukraine, right now, several minutes before our conversation or several hours before our meeting today, Ukraine has successfully struck the command post of this brigade in the Kursk region. We have seen new footage from the armed forces of Ukraine. How can you assess current situation in the Kursk region and unsustainable losses of Russian army? Because according to Forbes, the Russian brigade, 810th Brigade, has been redeployed out of the battle because of the high rate of casualties there.
I think it's a really important and significant development. We discussed before Christmas that Kursk would really hold the key to what happens in future. You know, Kursk is such an important piece of Russia to Russian people. You know, it's where the Great Battle of Kursk was fought in the summer of 1943, which eventually started the demise of the Nazis. But, you know, tens, hundreds of thousands of Russians were killed there. Now, to lose that territory last year to the, amazingly effective Ukraine military incursion was a devastating blow. And I think, you know, part of the reason that Putin is now backtracking and looking for a way out is that he was gambling on retaking Kursk. He said it. He said he'd retake Kursk by Christmas. And it's clear he obviously hasn't done that. And as we've seen in the last few days, you know, his main brigade there has been absolutely decimated by Ukrainian forces. And, I can quite see if the brigade has been redeployed, it's going to leave a vacuum, and potentially Ukraine military could take more of Kursk. So his failure to retake it is yet another, I think, severe cut to Putin's position and power. And if he can't retake Kursk by the time President Trump comes into power, again, he is going to be severely on the back foot. And, I think we're all delighted that the armed forces of Ukraine have realized quite how important Kursk is and have significantly sort of reinforced that area and had a lot of military success in the last few days and weeks. So as we discussed many times, Kursk is the key here. And at the moment, the Ukraine military is very much on the front foot in Kursk. And there is no sign that that's likely to change anytime soon.
North Korean army has suffered more than 3,000 casualties in the Kursk region. We have also seen some interesting videos with poor actions and poor performance of the North Korean soldiers there. How can you assess the effectiveness of the North Korean deployment and their military operation in the Kursk region, as we now have seen the main results of their operations there and high number of casualties?
Well, I think the North Korean performance and the North Korean involvement says an awful lot about Russia at the moment. First of all, I think it's virtually criminal that these soldiers who don't speak Russian, and I expect very few Russians speak North Korean, they've been thrown into, an area that they don't know, commanded by people who speak a language they don't speak, in a climate that they entirely unsuited to. The devastating cold winter of the east of Ukraine, and Kursk is completely alien to them. And the casualty rates, as we've seen, it's even higher than what the Russians are leaving. I mean, these people really are being marched to their death by their Russian masters. It is a crime. They are, in effect, mercenaries, but no doubt these poor soldiers, are not being paid the sort of bounties that you would expect mercenaries to be paid. So, Yeah, I think it's almost a crime against humanity to put these poor North Koreans. But what it shows even more is how desperate Putin is for soldiers. He can't generate any more Russians to go and fight, so he's having to buy, in effect, soldiers from North Korea. It says an awful lot about the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un as well. So yeah, I think this, again, if one look at the positive from Ukraine's perspective, shows that the sort of Russian edifice is crumbling. And that's why the West and the US must keep the pressure on Russia, keep supporting Ukraine to make sure that Ukraine gets a peace that it really deserves, which now seems almost at touching distance.
Do you feel that Vladimir Putin expected North Koreans to change the course of this battle in the Kursk region? Do you feel that he expected them to perform more professional way?
Well, if he did, I mean, he is showing that he really is out of touch. Now, everybody knows that Putin is not a soldier. He was a spy. And it's very different being a spy to being a soldier fighting. I think anybody who'd been a soldier, and me included, would have said and did say at the start that these North Koreans will make no difference at all. They will just be complete cannon fodder. It was clear that they were poorly trained, poorly equipped, didn't understand, what the Russian masters were telling them to do. And, it was almost a foregone conclusion that they would get slaughtered in the numbers that we're seeing them there. So I think it just shows the desperation that Putin has for soldiers and the complete misunderstanding about what it is like to fight as a soldier in military operations. And actually, the whole Kursk battle is really showing that, and which is why I think we've all discussed many times that Kursk is so critically important, and Putin just seems to be reinforcing failure. And the key principle of war is reinforced success, not failure. And he seems to be trying to bring about his own demise, which, if that is the case, I think we all applaud it.
I would like also to cover with you this big idea of deploying European peacekeeping forces to Ukraine. According to Politico, French President Emmanuel Macron is pressing for a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. What is your take on such idea, and do you expect Russia to agree with such deployment? Because we have heard another statement from Kremlin. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov rejected the idea of deploying European peacekeeping forces to Ukraine and banning Ukraine from joining NATO for 10 or 20 years. What is your take on that?
Well, I think it's all part of the military and political sort of discussions that are now happening at the moment. I think everybody's hoping and willing for a ceasefire, but there will be many factors that will be needed. And in effect, to have an effective ceasefire between Ukraine forces and Russian forces, some sort of monitoring force, some sort of peacekeeping force is traditionally what is done. Now, President Macron saying that it should be NATO forces or French forces or British forces, well, again, I think that's putting additional pressure on Russia. I personally think that actually having NATO forces, having British and French forces is probably the best way of doing it, because I'm pretty certain the Ukraine forces wouldn't try and attack French or British forces. And in a similar way, I don't think the Russians would either, because they know that that they would, suffer very, very bad consequences if they did that. So I think as we start getting in a position where one is anticipating a ceasefire, all sides will be trying to get into a position of advantage. The West supporting Ukraine, getting them in a good place. And of course, the Foreign Minister Lavrov, who seems to be one of the only sensible or not very sensible voices coming out of the Kremlin at the moment, is trying to get Russia in a decent place. But at the moment, all the cards seem to be stacked in Ukraine's favor, in the West's favor. And let's hope that when that ceasefire does come, whether it's UN peacekeepers, NATO peacekeepers, we get the peace that is acceptable to President Zelensky and the Ukraine people.
Also, I'd like to assess with you your assessment of Vladimir Putin's end of the year press conference and his performance there. What is your feeling after watching this press conference and or reading his main statement? And also interesting to note that Vladimir Putin in his New Year's address to the nation said that everything would be fine in 2025. How can you assess such messages from Kremlin?
Well, I think we've got used to really not believing a great deal that comes out of the Kremlin. President Putin and Lavrov and some of his other, close lieutenants, talk. We're well used to Russian propaganda and disinformation. And I think, nobody believes it. It's a bit like Putin and Lavrov and others threatening us with nuclear attack every day for the last 3 years. And nobody believes it now. His press conference was bizarre. And of course, there was a sort of wave of criticism coming towards Putin that we haven't really seen before. And in his New Year's statements, say everything will be fine. Well, I think, people in Russia are really getting concerned now. The price of everything is sky high. There is food missing off the shelves. A lot of people might be thinking, what on earth is going to happen? Is the Russian economy going to collapse? And Putin is trying to reassure them. But you sort of, nobody in the West believes what he said. And let's hope people in Russia are beginning to understand that as well. But I think the underlying thing that we've seen in the last few weeks coming out of the Kremlin and Putin is the realization that they are losing. They're on the back foot. And unless they do some, pretty snappy political and diplomatic work, maintain their position with their own people, then come the 20th of January, when President Trump takes control of the US and in effect, is the world's policeman again, then, Putin is in a really difficult position. And, the final bit here, he clearly wants to hang around in some form or another, but he knows that failed Russian dictators rarely last for very long once they've been toppled. And, I expect his own mortality is sort of flashing in front of his eyes at the moment. So a bizarre last few weeks. Hopefully, as we discussed at the beginning, the mood music is looking as though things might get better for Ukraine, that there will be a ceasefire that the Ukraine people and President Zelensky can agree to. And it would appear that the West and President Trump are very keen to ensure that happens. So I think we're all hoping that 2025 is going to be a lot better than 24, 22, and 23 for Ukraine.
Also, I'd like to cover with you recent incidents in the Baltic Sea with the underwater cables. Some Chinese military civilian vessels have damaged cables underwater there in the Baltic Sea. How can you assess these incidents and Russia's ability to continue sabotage actions inside Europe?
Well, I think the head of the CIA and the head of the British intelligence service, MI6, a few months warned against exactly this, that the Russians would step up their sabotage, step up their espionage across Europe and across the West to try and destabilize the West, to try and persuade people in Europe to stop supporting Ukraine. One anticipates that this will keep going, and the attack on the cables in the Baltic Sea is a classic bit of sabotage, and cutting cables that help us all communicate these days. That is a really dangerous bit of sabotage, which no doubt is why the Russians have looked at it. But we've also seen, the Russian incompetence. The shooting down of the jet last week, the civilian jet, and other things. So, they might be trying to do a lot, but there are isolated bits of success. But I think it also underlines that actually, things are not going well in Russia. One anticipates that they will continue their clandestine activities in Europe and the West. But if the ceasefire can happen, sooner rather than later, and Russia has to focus on its own country and sorting its problems out, then it will become more difficult for them to conduct these type of operations. But it's not new. This sort of stuff goes on all the time, has done ever thus. And it's clear that most Western intelligence agencies are putting a lot of time and effort in to try and thwart them as best they can.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and absolutely glory to Ukraine.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.